The letter trembled in Violet Reynolds's hands as the stagecoach rattled toward Veta, Colorado, carrying her toward a future she could barely imagine, and a past she desperately wanted to escape. The year was 1878, and Violet had left Philadelphia 3 weeks ago with nothing but 2 carpetbags, a borrowed traveling dress, and the carefully worded correspondence from a rancher named Harrison Lancaster, who needed a wife. The mountains rose around her like cathedral walls, their peaks still dusted with snow even in late spring, and she pressed her forehead against the dusty window glass, trying to calm the racing of her heart. 22 years old, and she was running toward a stranger because staying in Philadelphia had become impossible. Her father's gambling debts, his creditors who looked at her with eyes that made her skin crawl, the suffocating walls of their rented rooms that grew smaller each day until she could barely breathe. Harrison Lancaster's advertisement in the Matrimonial Times had seemed like a miracle, his letters kind and straightforward, promising nothing but honesty, hard work, and respect. But now, as the stagecoach wheels churned through the red dirt roads and the driver called out that they were approaching Veta, Violet felt the familiar tightness in her chest that had plagued her since childhood. Her hands went cold and clammy. Her breath came in short, rapid gasps. The other passengers, a mining prospector and a woman traveling to visit her sister, glanced at her with concern, but Violet couldn't speak, couldn't explain that sometimes her own mind became her prison, that fear could grip her without warning or reason, that she had episodes where the world closed in, and she was certain she would die. The doctor in Philadelphia had called it a nervous condition. Her mother, dead these 5 years, had called it sensitivity. Violet called it the monster that lived inside her chest, waiting to devour her when she least expected it. She clutched her reticule, focusing on the feel of the worn fabric, counting the stitches she could feel through the material. 1, 2, 3, 4. Breathe. 5, 6, 7, 8. The technique her mother had taught her. By the time the stage rolled to a stop in front of the general store on Veta's Main Street, Violet had regained enough composure to gather her bags and step down onto the wooden sidewalk. The town was smaller than she had imagined, a single dusty street lined with wooden buildings that seemed to lean into each other for support. The Rocky Mountains loomed all around, making the town feel like it sat in the palm of some giant hand. Violet saw the general store, a saloon, a church with a white steeple, a hotel, and several other establishments whose purposes she could only guess at. Men in dusty work clothes and women in practical calico moved along the street, going about their business with the easy familiarity of people who knew everyone and everything in their small world. A tall man stood apart from the others, his back straight, his hands holding his hat in front of him. He had dark brown hair that needed cutting, a strong jaw shadowed with stubble, and eyes the color of creek water after rain, clear and direct. He wore clean denims, a blue work shirt and boots that had been polished despite the dust of the town. He was watching her, and even from a distance, Violet could see the nervousness in the way he turned his hat in his hands. "Miss Reynolds," he called, his voice deep and careful. "Mr. Lancaster," Violet managed, her voice steadier than she felt. He crossed the distance between them in a few long strides, and up close, Violet could see he was younger than she had expected from his letters, perhaps 26 or 27. His face was weathered from outdoor work, but his eyes were kind, and when he smiled, it reached all the way to those eyes, crinkling the corners. "I am glad you made it safely," Harrison said. "The journey from Philadelphia, that is a long way to come." "It is," Violet agreed. She wanted to say more to make a good impression, but her throat felt tight again. The main street of Veta suddenly seemed too open, too exposed, with too many eyes watching the mail-order bride meet her intended husband. Harrison seemed to sense her discomfort. "Would you like to get something to eat? There is a decent restaurant in the hotel. We can talk, get to know each other a bit before we make any decisions. I want you to feel comfortable, Miss Reynolds. There is no pressure." The kindness in his voice nearly undid her. Violet nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and Harrison picked up her bags as if they weighed nothing. He gestured toward the hotel, and they walked side by side, not touching, two strangers bound by letters and hope and desperation in equal measure. The hotel restaurant was simple but clean, with checkered tablecloths and the smell of fresh bread filling the air. Harrison pulled out a chair for Violet, then sat across from her, his large hands resting on the table. A woman came over to take their order, eyeing Violet with open curiosity, and Harrison ordered coffee and sandwiches for them both. When they were alone again, Harrison cleared his throat. "I want to be honest with you, Miss Reynolds. My ranch is about 5 miles outside of town. It is not much, just a small cattle operation, but it is mine free and clear. The work is hard and the winters are harsh. I am not a rich man and I may never be, but I am steady and I keep my word and I will treat you with respect." Violet traced the pattern on the tablecloth with one finger. "Why did you need a mail-order bride, Mr. Lancaster? Surely there are women here who would be interested in a man with his own land." A flush crept up Harrison's neck. "There are not many unmarried women in Veta, and the ones who are here, well, we have known each other since we were children. It feels strange, trying to court someone you once saw picking her nose in Sunday school." He said it so seriously that Violet found herself smiling despite her nervousness. "Also, I am not good at talking to women. I am better with cattle and horses. They do not care if you say the wrong thing." "You seem to be talking to me just fine," Violet said softly. "Letters are easier," Harrison admitted. "I can think about what I want to say. In person, I get all tangled up." He looked directly at her then, his gray-green eyes searching her face. "What about you, Miss Reynolds? What made you answer my advertisement?" The food arrived, giving Violet a moment to gather her thoughts. She picked up her coffee cup, welcoming the warmth against her palms. "My father has debts," she said finally, deciding on a version of the truth. "Philadelphia was becoming difficult. I wanted a fresh start, somewhere far away from the past." Harrison nodded slowly. "Are you running from the law?" "No." "Are you married to someone else?" "No." "Do you have a terrible temper that will lead you to poison my supper?" Violet looked up sharply, only to see the faint twitch of a smile at the corner of Harrison's mouth. "No," she said, and felt herself relax slightly. "I am a reasonably good cook, actually. My mother taught me." "Then I think we will manage," Harrison said. "I have a proposition for you, Miss Reynolds. Stay at the hotel tonight. Give yourself time to rest and think. Tomorrow, if you are willing, I will take you out to the ranch so you can see it. If you decide you want to stay, we can get married next week. If you decide you want to go back to Philadelphia or anywhere else, I will pay for your ticket. No questions asked, no hard feelings." It was more than fair. It was generous. Violet felt the tightness in her chest ease a little. "What if I am not what you expected?" she asked. Harrison tilted his head, studying her. "You have red hair," he said. "In your letters you said it was brown." "It is auburn," Violet corrected. "In dim light it looks brown." "I like it," Harrison said simply. "You are prettier than I expected, if I am being honest. I worried you would take one look at me and run back to the stage." "You are not unpleasant to look at," Violet said, and felt heat rise to her cheeks at her own boldness. They finished their meal in a more comfortable silence, stealing glances at each other like children sharing a secret. When Harrison walked her to her room at the hotel, He handed her the key and stepped back immediately, maintaining a respectful distance. "I will come by tomorrow morning around 9, he said. "Wear practical clothes if you have them. The ranch is dusty work." "Mr. Lancaster," Violet said as he turned to leave. He looked back and she forced herself to meet his eyes. "Thank you for your kindness today. It means more than you know." Something shifted in Harrison's expression, a softness that made him look younger. "Sleep well, Miss Reynolds." Violet watched him walk down the hallway, his boots thudding softly on the wooden floor, then let herself into the small, clean room. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands shaking now that she was alone. She had made it. She had traveled across the country, met Harrison Lancaster, and he seemed like a genuinely decent man. But the familiar fear crept in around the edges of her relief. What happened when he discovered the truth about her? When she had one of her episodes and he saw her gasping for air, unable to explain what was wrong? Would he still want a wife who sometimes could not leave her room because the world outside seemed too large and threatening? Would he understand, or would he think her weak and damaged? She lay back on the bed, still fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow she would see the ranch. Tomorrow she would start deciding whether she could build a life here, in this small Colorado town, with a man she barely knew, but who might be her only chance at safety and something like happiness. Morning came bright and clear, the mountain air sharp and clean in a way Philadelphia air had never been. Violet dressed in her most practical traveling suit, a dark blue wool that was sturdy if not fashionable, and braided her auburn hair into a practical plait. When she came down to the hotel lobby, Harrison was already there, holding his hat and talking quietly with an older man who had a sheriff's badge pinned to his vest. "Miss Reynolds," Harrison said, straightening when he saw her. "This is Sheriff Dawson. He wanted to meet you." The sheriff tipped his hat. "Madam, just wanted to welcome you to Veta and let you know that if you ever need anything, my office is right across from the general store. We look after our own here." It was a kind gesture, but Violet understood the unspoken message too. They were watching to make sure she was not trouble, that she treated Harrison fairly. Small towns protected their own, and she was the outsider. "Thank you, Sheriff," Violet said. "I appreciate the welcome." Harrison had a wagon waiting outside, pulled by 2 sturdy horses. He helped Violet up onto the bench seat, his hand firm and warm on her elbow, then climbed up beside her. They rolled out of town, past the last of the buildings and into open country that took Violet's breath away. The land stretched out in waves of gold and green, dotted with cattle and bordered by the mountains that dominated the horizon. The sky was so blue it almost hurt to look at, and the air smelled of sage and pine, and something wild she could not name. "It is beautiful," Violet said, and meant it. "It gets under your skin," Harrison agreed. "I came out here 5 years ago with nothing but a horse and my savings. Bought the land cheap because the previous owner gave up after a hard winter. But I love it. Even when it is difficult, I cannot imagine being anywhere else." They drove in comfortable silence, and Violet found herself relaxing into the rhythm of the wagon. Harrison pointed out landmarks, a creek where the water ran cold and clear, a stand of aspen trees that turned gold in the fall, a rock formation that looked like a sleeping bear. He talked about the land with affection and respect, and Violet could hear the pride in his voice. The ranch house appeared gradually, a low building made of logs with a stone chimney and a covered porch. It was simple but well maintained, with real glass windows and a sturdy door. Behind it stood a barn, a chicken coop, and several corrals. Cattle grazed in the distance, red and white against the green grass. "It is not fancy," Harrison said, suddenly nervous again. "But it is solid. The roof does not leak and the chimney draws well. There are 2 bedrooms, a main room and a kitchen. I built the furniture myself. Violet climbed down from the wagon before Harrison could help her, too eager to see everything. She walked slowly toward the house, taking in every detail. The porch had a bench and a rocking chair. Someone had planted wildflowers in a neat bed along the front. The door opened smoothly when Harrison unlocked it, and the inside was clean and orderly in a way that surprised her. Men living alone often let their homes become disaster zones, but Harrison's house was tidy, with dishes washed and stacked, floors swept, and furniture arranged with care. The main room held a stone fireplace, a table with 4 chairs, a sofa, and several oil lamps. The kitchen was well stocked, with a good iron stove and plenty of pots and pans. Harrison showed her the bedrooms, the larger one clearly his, the smaller one set up as a guest room but empty of personal belongings. "If you stay, this would be your room," Harrison said, gesturing to the smaller bedroom. "Until you are comfortable with other arrangements. I know this is all very fast and I do not expect, that is, I would not pressure you into anything you are not ready for." He was blushing again, and Violet felt a rush of affection for this man who was trying so hard to make her feel safe. "I understand," she said softly, "and I appreciate your consideration." They walked around the property, and Harrison introduced her to his 2 horses, explaining their temperaments and quirks with the same affection he had shown for the land. He showed her the chickens, which she would be responsible for if she stayed, and the vegetable garden he had started but admitted he was terrible at maintaining. "I can keep plants alive," Violet offered. "My mother had a small garden, even in Philadelphia. She grew herbs and vegetables in window boxes." Harrison's face lit up. "That would be wonderful. I try, but everything seems to wither under my care." They had lunch on the porch, simple fare of bread and cheese and apples, and talked more easily now. Harrison asked about her life in Philadelphia, and Violet told him carefully edited stories, focusing on her mother, who had been a teacher before marriage, and her own education, which had been better than most girls received. She asked about his family, and he explained that his parents had died of fever when he was 20, that he had 1 sister married and living in Denver, and that he had come west because staying in their Missouri hometown had felt like living in a grave. "I needed to build something of my own," Harrison said. "Something that was mine, not my father's or my grandfather's. Does that make sense?" "It does," Violet said. She looked out at the rolling land, the mountains beyond, the enormous sky. "I think I needed that too. To be somewhere I could be someone new, not just my father's daughter or my mother's ghost." Harrison turned to look at her, and something passed between them, an understanding that went deeper than words. They were both running, both building, both hoping that this strange arrangement could become something real. As the afternoon wore on, they worked together to weed the vegetable garden, and Violet felt more at peace than she had in months. The physical work, the warm sun, the quiet presence of Harrison beside her, it all combined to quiet the constant anxiety that usually hummed beneath her thoughts. But as the sun began to sink toward the mountains and Harrison said they should head back to town, Violet felt the fear creeping back in. On the wagon ride back to Veta, she tried to summon the courage to tell him, to explain about her episodes, her fears, the way her mind sometimes became her enemy. But every time she opened her mouth to speak, the words lodged in her throat. What if he changed his mind? What if he looked at her differently, saw her as broken? "Are you all right?" Harrison asked, glancing over at her. "You have gone very quiet." "I am just thinking," Violet said, "about whether to stay, about many things." Harrison was quiet for a moment. "Miss Reynolds, I know we are still strangers, but I hope you will feel you can talk to me. If something is troubling you, I would like to help if I can." This was her chance. Violet took a deep breath, her hands clenching in her lap. "Mr. Lancaster, I need to tell you something about myself. Something that might change your mind about wanting to marry me." Harrison pulled the wagon to a stop, right there on the empty road with the mountains watching. He turned to face her fully, his expression serious. "All right, I am listening." Violet forced herself to meet his eyes. "I have a nervous condition. Sometimes I have episodes where I cannot breathe properly, where my heart races and I feel like I am dying even though I am not. Sometimes I cannot leave my room for days because the world outside feels too dangerous. My hands shake and I cannot sleep, and I am afraid of things that do not make sense to be afraid of." The words tumbled out faster now, desperate to be said. "I am not mad. The doctor said I am not mad, but I am not normal either. I take herbs sometimes that help, chamomile and valerian, but they do not always work. I did not tell you before because I was afraid you would not want me, but I cannot marry you under false pretenses. You deserve to know what you would be getting." She stopped, breathless, waiting for Harrison to say he was sorry but this would not work, that he needed a wife who was strong and capable, not one who fell apart for no reason. But Harrison just looked at her with those steady gray-green eyes, his expression thoughtful. "Thank you for telling me," he said finally. "I know that took courage. Are you going to withdraw your offer?" Violet asked, her voice small. "No," Harrison said simply. "Miss Reynolds, we all have things we struggle with. I am afraid of failing, of losing the ranch, of not being good enough. I get angry sometimes and I have to go chop wood for an hour until I calm down. I have nightmares about my parents dying, even though it has been years. None of us are perfect." "It is not the same," Violet protested. "My fear, it is not rational. It does not make sense." "Does it need to make sense?" Harrison asked. "You said the herbs help sometimes. Do you have them with you?" "Yes, I brought my supply." "Then we will make sure you always have them. If you need to stay in your room for a day, you will stay in your room. If you need me to sit with you during an episode, I will sit with you. If you need space, I will give you space. I am not afraid of your fear, Miss Reynolds. I am only afraid that you will not give me a chance to show you that I mean what I say." Violet felt tears prickling at her eyes. "Why would you be willing to do all that for someone you barely know?" Harrison reached over and gently took her hand, his palm rough with calluses but his touch careful. "Because I see something in you that I recognize. You are brave enough to cross the country alone to start a new life. You are honest enough to tell me the truth even when it might cost you everything. You laugh at my terrible jokes and you do not mind getting dirt under your fingernails. I think we could be happy together, Miss Reynolds, if you are willing to try." The tears spilled over then, and Violet did not try to stop them. "I want to try," she whispered. "I am so tired of being afraid all the time. I want to be brave enough to build a life here." "Then we will build it together," Harrison said. He squeezed her hand once, then released it and picked up the reins. "I think you are much braver than you give yourself credit for." They rode the rest of the way back to Veta in silence, but it was a different kind of silence now, full of possibility and fragile hope. When Harrison helped Violet down from the wagon in front of the hotel, he held her hand a moment longer than necessary. "So I will speak to Pastor Williams tomorrow about the wedding?" he asked. "Yes," Violet said, and felt the rightness of the decision settle into her bones. "Next Saturday, if that works." "That works," Harrison agreed. His smile was like sunrise, warm and full of promise. The next week passed in a blur of preparation. Violet met with Pastor Williams and his wife Martha, who took her under her wing immediately and introduced her to the other women in town. They were curious but kind, helping her choose fabric for a simple wedding dress, sharing recipes and advice about mountain living, warning her about the harsh winters and the isolation of ranch life. Violet spent her days sewing her dress and her nights lying awake, alternating between excitement and terror at the enormity of what she was doing. Harrison came into town every day with some excuse, bringing her fresh eggs or asking her opinion on a bridle he was thinking of buying, clearly just wanting to see her. They took walks together, chaperoned by Martha Williams, who tactfully stayed several steps behind, and they talked about everything and nothing. Harrison told her about his plans for the ranch, how he wanted to expand the herd, maybe get some sheep, definitely fix the fence on the north pasture. Violet told him about books she loved, her dream of maybe teaching children someday if Veta ever got a proper school, her mother's stories about growing up in Virginia before the war. 3 days before the wedding, Violet had her first episode since arriving in Colorado. She woke in the night with her heart pounding, the hotel room walls pressing in on her, certain she was suffocating. She stumbled to the window and threw it open, gasping for air, her whole body shaking. It took an hour for the panic to subside, and by morning, she was exhausted and terrified that she had made a terrible mistake. How could she marry Harrison when she was so broken? She almost did not go down to breakfast, but Harrison was supposed to meet her, and she could not bear to stand him up without explanation. She dressed carefully, trying to hide the shadows under her eyes, and made her way down to the restaurant. Harrison took one look at her and stood up immediately. "What is wrong?" "Nothing," Violet said automatically. "Miss Reynolds, Violet." It was the first time he had used her given name. "Please, talk to me." They sat down and Violet, too tired to dissemble, told him about the night before. She watched his face for disgust or disappointment, but saw only concern. "Did the herbs help?" he asked. "I could not think straight enough to take them," Violet admitted. "Then we will practice," Harrison said firmly. "Right now, where do you keep them?" Violet pulled the small pouch from her reticule, and Harrison examined the dried chamomile and valerian. "Show me how you make the tea," he said. They went into the hotel kitchen, and Violet showed him how to steep the herbs, the right proportions, how long to let them brew. Harrison paid careful attention, asking questions, making sure he understood. Then he made her drink a cup, sitting with her while she did, his presence solid and reassuring. "When we are married and you are at the ranch, you need to tell me when you feel an episode coming on," Harrison said. "Do not try to hide it or manage it alone. Let me help. That is what a partnership is, right? We help each other." Violet set down her empty teacup. "What if I am too much? What if you grow tired of dealing with my problems? What if the cattle get sick? What if we have a drought? What if I break my leg and cannot work for weeks?" Harrison countered. "Life is full of what-ifs, Violet. We will handle them as they come together." His certainty was like a rock in a storm, and Violet clung to it. "You are a good man, Harrison Lancaster." "I am a man who wants to marry you," Harrison said. "And I am counting the days until Saturday." The wedding was simple and small, held in the church with its white steeple, attended by what seemed like the entire population of Veta. Violet wore her new dress, pale blue with tiny white flowers embroidered at the collar and cuffs, and carried a bouquet of wildflowers that Martha Williams had helped her pick that morning. Harrison wore a new suit, clearly uncomfortable in the stiff collar but heartbreakingly handsome. When he saw Violet walk down the aisle, his face transformed with joy and something like awe. They spoke their vows in front of Pastor Williams and God and all of Veta, promising to love and honor each other, to face whatever came together. When Harrison kissed her, it was gentle and brief, proper for a church wedding, but Violet felt it all the way to her toes. The congregation clapped, and Martha Williams cried happy tears, and just like that, Violet Reynolds became Violet Lancaster. The reception was held in the church hall, with food brought by every family in town. There was music and dancing, and Harrison proved to be a surprisingly good dancer, guiding Violet through reels and waltzes with confident hands. People came up to congratulate them, to welcome Violet to the community, to offer advice and good wishes. It was overwhelming, but in a good way, and Violet found herself laughing more than she had in years. As the sun began to set, Harrison leaned down and whispered, "Are you ready to go home?" Home. Violet tested the word in her mind and found she liked the sound of it. Yes. They said their goodbyes and loaded into the wagon, now decorated with ribbons and tin cans courtesy of some of the younger men in town. The noise followed them out of Veta, clattering and banging, until Harrison finally stopped and cut the cans loose, laughing. The ranch looked different in the twilight, softer somehow. Harrison helped Violet down from the wagon and then, without warning, swept her up into his arms. "I am supposed to carry you over the threshold," he explained, his eyes twinkling. "It is tradition." "I am not arguing," Violet said, looping her arms around his neck. He carried her into the house, which glowed with lamplight. Someone, probably Martha Williams, had been there during the wedding to light lamps and leave flowers on the table. Harrison set Violet down gently in the main room, and they stood looking at each other, suddenly shy. "I meant what I said," Harrison said quietly. "About having your own room, taking things slow." "I know," Violet said. "But Harrison, I do not want to sleep alone tonight. I do not need, that is, we do not have to, but could you just hold me? I think I would feel safer." Something flickered in Harrison's eyes, tender and fierce at once. "I can do that. I would like to do that." They got ready for bed in their separate rooms, and Violet put on her new nightgown, practical white cotton but with lace at the throat and wrists. When she came out, Harrison was waiting in his nightshirt and trousers, his hair damp from washing. He held out his hand, and she took it. In his bedroom, the larger one that was now theirs, Harrison pulled back the quilts on the bed. They lay down together, awkward at first, figuring out how to fit together. But then Harrison wrapped his arm around Violet and she laid her head on his chest, and it felt right. She could hear his heartbeat, steady and strong, and his hand stroked her hair gently. "Are you happy?" Harrison asked into the darkness. Violet thought about it, really thought about it. "Yes," she said, surprised to find it was true. "I think I am." "Good," Harrison said. "Me too." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other, and Violet slept through the night without nightmares for the first time in months. The next weeks were an adjustment, learning to live together, to navigate the rhythms of ranch life. Violet threw herself into making the house a home, cooking meals, tending the garden, caring for the chickens, learning to milk the cow Harrison bought from a neighbor. The work was hard but satisfying in a way her life in Philadelphia had never been. She could see the results of her labor, vegetables growing, eggs collected, meals shared. Harrison was patient and kind, teaching her what she needed to know about ranch life without making her feel inadequate. He showed her how to handle the horses, how to watch for signs of illness in the cattle, how to read the weather in the mountains. They fell into a comfortable partnership, working side by side during the day, sitting together in the evenings while Harrison read aloud from the newspaper and Violet mended clothes or knitted. The physical side of their marriage developed slowly, naturally. Harrison never pushed, always letting Violet set the pace. There were shy kisses that grew bolder, tentative touches that became more confident, and finally, a night when Violet reached for Harrison with clear intent, and he responded with a tenderness that made her cry. Their joining was sweet and a little awkward. Two people learning each other, but it felt right and good. And afterward, Harrison held her close and told her she was beautiful and brave and everything he had hoped for. But Violet had not had an episode since the wedding, and she found herself waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the monster in her chest to return and ruin everything. She took her herbs preventatively, tried to stay calm, but the fear of the fear was almost as bad as the fear itself. A month after the wedding, it happened. They had gone into town for supplies, and Violet had been fine, chatting with Martha Williams in the general store, laughing at the antics of the sheriff's new puppy. But on the ride home, the sky had darkened with thunderclouds, the air pressure changing in that way that made her head ache. The first crack of thunder made her jump, and the second sent her spiraling. Her breath came in short gasps. Her heart raced. The world tilted and spun. She could not get enough air. She was dying. She was certain she was dying. "Violet," Harrison's voice came from very far away. "Violet, look at me." She could not. The wagon was moving too fast. The horses would bolt. They would crash. She would die here on this mountain road. Harrison pulled the wagon to a stop and turned to her, taking her face in his hands. "Violet, look at me, right at me. Do not look at anything else." She forced her eyes to focus on his face, on those steady gray-green eyes. "That is good," Harrison said, his voice calm and firm. "Now breathe with me. In through your nose, count to 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold it, now out through your mouth. 1, 2, 3, 4. Again." He breathed with her, his hands solid on her face, anchoring her. Gradually, painfully, the panic began to recede. Her breathing slowed. Her heart stopped racing. The world came back into focus. "I am sorry," Violet gasped when she could speak. "Why are you sorry?" Harrison asked. "This is not your fault. I ruined our trip to town. You did not ruin anything." Harrison pulled her against his chest, wrapping his arms around her. "You had an episode. We dealt with it, that is all. But what if it happens again? What if I cannot control it? Then we will deal with it again," Harrison said simply. "Violet, you do not have to control everything. You just have to trust that I am here and I am not going anywhere." Thunder rumbled overhead and Violet flinched, but Harrison held her tighter. "Do you want to stay here until the storm passes, or do you want to make a run for home?" "Home," Violet whispered. Harrison got them home through the storm, the rain soaking them both, but he never faltered, never showed fear or frustration. Once inside, he built up the fire while Violet changed into dry clothes, then made her chamomile tea without being asked, exactly the way she had shown him. They sat together in front of the fire, wrapped in quilts, and Violet felt the last of the panic drain away. "I was so afraid this would happen," Violet said quietly. "I was afraid you would see me like that and regret marrying me." Harrison set down his tea and turned to face her fully. "Listen to me, Violet. I could never regret marrying you. You are the best thing that has ever happened to me. Yes, you have episodes. Yes, they are frightening and difficult, but they are part of you and I love you, all of you, even the scared parts. Especially the scared parts because they show me how brave you really are." "You love me," Violet whispered. They had not said those words yet. "I love you," Harrison repeated firmly. "I think I have loved you since you told me the truth about your condition, since you were brave enough to risk everything for honesty. I love your laugh and your determination, and the way you sing to the chickens when you think I cannot hear. I love how you look in the morning with your hair all tangled and your eyes still sleepy. I love you, Violet Lancaster, all of you." Violet felt the tears come, but they were good tears, healing tears. "I love you too," she said. "I did not think I could, not this fast, but I do. You make me feel safe, Harrison. You make me feel like I can face anything as long as you are beside me." He kissed her then, deep and thorough, and Violet kissed him back, pouring all her love and gratitude and hope into it. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Harrison rested his forehead against hers. "We are going to be all right," he said. "Whatever comes, we will face it together." "Together," Violet agreed. Summer turned to fall, and the aspen trees turned gold just like Harrison had promised. The work of the ranch continued, harder now as they prepared for winter, cutting wood and storing food and making sure the animals would be secure through the cold months. Violet had 2 more episodes, one triggered by a close encounter with a rattlesnake that actually made sense to be afraid of, and one that seemed to come out of nowhere. Each time, Harrison was there, calm and steady, helping her breathe through it, never making her feel weak or broken. But more than that, Harrison encouraged her to face her fears in small ways. When she admitted she was afraid of riding horses alone, he taught her carefully, patiently, riding beside her until she felt confident enough to go to the creek by herself. When she said she was afraid of meeting new people, worried they would judge her, he invited neighbors over for dinner, one couple at a time, staying close, supporting her. When she worried about being trapped at the ranch during the winter, he made sure they went to town regularly, establishing a routine so it felt safe. Violet learned that bravery was not the absence of fear, but moving forward despite it. She learned that Harrison's strength gave her strength, that his belief in her helped her believe in herself. And slowly, gradually, the episodes came less frequently. The monster in her chest grew quieter, still there but no longer controlling her life. Winter came, and it was as harsh as everyone had warned. The snow piled high, and some days they could not leave the house at all. But the ranch was cozy, the fire always burning, and Violet found she did not mind the isolation. She had Harrison, and that was enough. They spent the long evenings together, talking and reading and making love, learning each other in ways that went deeper than physical. Harrison told her about his childhood, his dreams, his fears. Violet shared her memories of her mother, her complicated feelings about her father, her hope that someday she might feel whole. "You are whole," Harrison told her one night as they lay in bed, the wind howling outside. "You were always whole, Violet. You just could not see it." By spring, when the snow melted and the world turned green again, Violet realized she had not had an episode in over 2 months. She felt stronger, more settled in herself. The ranch was truly home now, and Harrison was not just her husband but her partner, her best friend, her anchor. They were working in the garden one warm May morning, planting vegetables for the summer, when Violet felt a familiar but long-absent sensation. She straightened up, one hand going to her stomach, realization washing over her. "Harrison," she said. He looked up from the row he was hoeing, concerned. "Are you all right? Do you need to rest?" "I think I am with child." Harrison dropped the hoe. He stared at her, his face cycling through shock, joy, and fear in rapid succession. "Are you sure?" "I am 3 weeks late, and I have been feeling sick in the mornings," Violet said. "I did not want to say anything until I was certain, but Harrison, I think we are going to have a baby." He crossed to her in 2 strides and swept her up, spinning her around before setting her down quickly. "I should not have done that. Did I hurt you?" "Are you all right?" Violet laughed, the sound bright and free. "I am fine. Pregnant women are not made of glass." "I am going to be a father," Harrison said, wonder in his voice. "We are going to be parents. Are you happy?" Violet asked, suddenly nervous. "Happy, Violet, I am terrified and thrilled in equal measure. A child, our child." He placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Are you afraid?" Violet considered the question honestly. "A little," she admitted, "but more excited than afraid." "I think that is progress." "That is definitely progress," Harrison agreed. He pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully like she was precious. "You are going to be an amazing mother." The pregnancy was easier than Violet had feared. She had morning sickness that passed by her 4th month, and her energy came back strong. Martha Williams and the other women in Veta rallied around her, sharing advice and hand-me-down baby clothes, knitting blankets and caps. Harrison was attentive to the point of being ridiculous, trying to prevent her from doing any heavy work, following her around like a worried sheepdog, until Violet finally had to sit him down and explain that she was pregnant, not dying. But his concern came from love, and Violet could not really fault him for that. He talked to her belly at night, telling their child about the ranch, about the mountains, about all the things they would do together. He built a cradle with his own hands, carved and sanded and polished until it gleamed. He painted the small bedroom that had been Violet's, transforming it into a nursery. Violet's fears about how pregnancy might affect her episodes proved largely unfounded. She had 2 small ones, both easily managed, but for the most part she felt calmer and more grounded than she had in years. It was as if her body was too busy growing a new life to waste energy on phantom fears. In January of 1879, during a snowstorm that made travel impossible, Violet went into labor. Martha Williams was staying with them, prepared for this possibility, and she guided Violet through the process with capable hands and a calm voice. Harrison was there too, holding Violet's hand, letting her squeeze until his fingers went numb, murmuring encouragement even as she cursed him for doing this to her. After 12 hours of labor, as the storm raged outside and the fire crackled in the hearth, Violet gave birth to a son. He came into the world screaming, red-faced and furious, perfect and beautiful. When Martha placed him in Violet's arms, wrapped in a soft blanket, Violet felt something shift and settle deep in her soul. This was her child, her son, born of love and hope and the courage to face her fears. "He is perfect," Harrison breathed, touching the baby's tiny hand with one finger. The baby gripped it immediately, and Harrison's face crumpled with emotion. "Violet, he is perfect." They named him Henry Matthew Lancaster, after both their fathers, hoping to honor the past while building toward the future. Henry was a good baby, healthy and strong-lunged, and Violet took to motherhood with a fierce protectiveness that surprised her. She who had been so afraid of everything was now willing to face down a mountain lion if it threatened her child. Harrison was a devoted father, getting up with Violet for night feedings, changing diapers without complaint, singing Henry to sleep in his deep, slightly off-key voice. Watching him with their son, Violet fell in love with him all over again, deeper and truer than before. Life settled into a new rhythm. The ranch work continued, harder now with a baby to care for, but they managed. Violet learned to carry Henry in a sling while she worked in the garden, to time her chores around his naps, to accept help when neighbors offered. Harrison hired a young ranch hand named Peter to help with the heavier work, giving him more time to spend with his family. The years passed, each one bringing its own challenges and joys. When Henry was 2, Violet became pregnant again. This time she gave birth to a daughter they named Rose Margaret, who had her mother's red hair and her father's steady gray-green eyes. Henry was fascinated by his little sister, constantly trying to help take care of her, and Violet's heart felt so full she thought it might burst. Violet still had episodes occasionally, less frequently now, but they still came. But she had learned to manage them, to recognize the warning signs, to ask for help without shame. Harrison was always there, steady as the mountains, and their children learned early that sometimes Mama needed quiet time, and that was okay. Violet worried about passing her anxious nature on to them, But Martha Williams, who had become like a mother to her, reassured her that every parent worried about damaging their children, and the fact that she cared so much meant she was doing it right. When Rose was 3 and Henry 5, Harrison came to Violet with a proposition. The ranch next to theirs was for sale, and the owner was willing to sell at a reasonable price. If they bought it, they could expand significantly, maybe hire more help, really build something lasting for their children. It would be a risk, Harrison admitted. We would have to take out a loan and it would be tight for a few years. But I think we could do it, Violet, if you are willing to try. Violet thought about the girl who had arrived in Veta 7 years ago, terrified and running from a past that threatened to swallow her. She thought about everything she had faced since then, all the fears confronted, all the strength she had discovered she possessed. She thought about the man beside her, who had never once faltered in his support, who had helped her become the woman she was meant to be. "Let us do it," she said. "Let us build something amazing." They bought the land, and the next few years were the hardest they had yet faced. Money was tight, and the work was endless. There were nights when Violet lay awake worrying about whether they had made a terrible mistake. But they kept going, day after day, supporting each other, refusing to give up. Harrison worked himself nearly to exhaustion, and Violet managed the house and children and also took over the ranch's bookkeeping, discovering she had a head for numbers. Slowly, gradually, their gamble paid off. The expanded herd thrived. Cattle prices rose. They hired 2 more ranch hands and paid off their loan 3 years early. The Lancaster Ranch became one of the most successful operations in the area, and Harrison and Violet became respected members of the Veta community. They had earned their place through hard work and determination, and no one remembered anymore that Violet had arrived as a mail-order bride. She was simply Violet Lancaster, Harrison's wife, Henry and Rose's mother, a woman who had helped build something lasting from nothing. More children came, another son named James, and then finally another daughter, Sarah, completing their family. The house had to be expanded, new rooms added to accommodate everyone, but it remained a warm and loving home. The children grew up knowing they were loved unconditionally, that both their parents would move heaven and earth for them, that their home was a safe place. Violet taught them to read and write, and eventually, Veta got a small school where she volunteered to teach several days a week. Harrison taught them about ranching, about hard work and integrity, about treating the land with respect. Together, they taught their children that fear was normal, that everyone struggled with something, that asking for help was strength, not weakness. Henry grew into a fine young man, serious and hardworking like his father. Rose was spirited and independent, with her mother's determination. James was gentle and loved animals more than anything. Sarah was the baby, mischievous and charming, able to wrap everyone around her little finger. They were good children, growing into good people, and Violet and Harrison were proud of each of them. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Harrison took Violet up to a ridge overlooking the ranch. It was summer, and the land spread out below them in shades of green and gold, the cattle grazing peacefully, the house smoke rising from the chimney where their oldest daughter was making supper and watching her younger siblings. "You remember the day I brought you out here for the first time?" Harrison asked, his arm around Violet's waist. "I was terrified," Violet admitted. "Of you, of the land, of the future, of everything." "You were the bravest person I had ever met," Harrison said. "You still are." Violet leaned into him, solid and warm and familiar. "I was not brave. I was just desperate." "You were both," Harrison corrected, "and you took that desperation and turned it into this." He gestured at the ranch below, at the life they had built. "You faced every fear, Violet, every single one, and you are still standing." We are still standing, Violet corrected. I could not have done any of this without you, Harrison. You taught me that I did not have to be perfect, that I did not have to face everything alone. You gave me a place to be myself, fears and all. Harrison turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. His hair was graying at the temples now, and there were lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun, but he was still the most handsome man Violet had ever seen. More importantly, he was still the kindest, the steadiest, the one person she trusted above all others. I love you, Harrison said, like it was the most important thing in the world. I have loved you since the day you looked at me in that hotel restaurant and decided I was worth the risk. I will love you until my last breath and beyond. I love you too, Violet said, tears pricking her eyes. Happy tears, the kind that came from overwhelming gratitude for a life that had turned out better than she ever could have imagined. Thank you for seeing me, Harrison. Thank you for not letting my fears define me. Thank you for helping me become strong. You were always strong, Harrison said. I just held your hand while you figured that out. They kissed there on the ridge, with the mountains watching and the wind whispering through the grass. Two people who had taken a chance on each other and won everything. Below them, their children's laughter drifted up on the breeze, and smoke rose from the chimney of the home they had built together, and the future stretched out bright and full of promise. Life was not perfect. Violet still had difficult days, times when the old fears crept back in, but they were manageable now, a part of her life but no longer the center of it. She had learned that courage was not the absence of fear but the decision to move forward anyway. She had learned that love could be a foundation strong enough to build a life on. She had learned that sometimes the thing you are running from leads you exactly where you need to be. The years continued to pass, each one adding its own chapter to their story. Henry married a girl from town and started his own ranch. Rose became a teacher, fulfilling Violet's old dream. James took over the daily running of the Lancaster ranch, with Harrison easing into a supervisory role. Sarah married a lawyer and moved to Colorado Springs but visited often, filling the house with her energy and her own growing family. Harrison and Violet grew old together, their hands weathered from work, their faces lined with years, but their love unwavering. They sat together on the porch in rocking chairs Harrison had made, watching grandchildren play in the yard, remembering the young, scared people they had been when they first met. "You ever regret it?" Violet asked one evening, when the mountains were turning purple with twilight. Answering my letter, taking a chance on a mail-order bride. Harrison reached over and took her hand, his grip still strong despite his years. "Not for a single moment," he said. "You were the answer to a prayer I did not even know I was praying. You gave me a family, a real home, a purpose beyond just surviving. You taught me that strength comes in many forms, that vulnerability is not weakness, that love is choosing someone every single day. You saved me," Violet said softly. "I was drowning and you pulled me out. You showed me I was worth saving." "We saved each other," Harrison corrected. "That is what love does, Violet. It makes us better than we could ever be alone." As the stars came out one by one, bright in the clear mountain air, Violet thought about the long journey that had brought her here. From terrified mail-order bride to mother and grandmother, from a woman ruled by fear to someone who had learned to face life with courage, from a stranger in a strange land to someone who belonged completely. It had not been easy, but nothing worthwhile ever was. She looked at Harrison, her husband of over 40 years, her partner in all things, the man who had faced every one of her fears beside her without hesitation. His gray-green eyes met hers, still full of love and warmth and unwavering support, and Violet felt the peace that came from a life well lived, a love fully embraced. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" Harrison asked. "For everything," Violet said. "For seeing me, for loving me, for building this beautiful life with me, for never giving up, even when I wanted to give up on myself." Harrison lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "It was my privilege," he said, "every single day." They sat together as the stars wheeled overhead and the night sounds of the ranch surrounded them. Two people who had taken a leap of faith and found everything they had ever needed in each other. The mail-order bride and the cowboy who had been brave enough to love her, fears and all, who had built a legacy of love and courage that would endure long after they were gone. In the house behind them, their family gathered for supper, their children and grandchildren filling the rooms with life and laughter. The ranch spread out around them, prosperous and thriving, a testament to hard work and determination. The mountains stood eternal and unchanging, watching over it all. And Violet Lancaster, who had once been too afraid to leave her room, who had crossed a continent running from her past, who had confessed her deepest fears to a stranger and found a love that conquered them all, knew with absolute certainty that every step of the journey had been worth it. She had found her home, her purpose, her peace, and the brave cowboy who had faced it all beside her, making her brave too. This was the life she had always been meant to live, and she had never been more grateful for the courage it had taken to claim it. The future stretched out before their family, bright and full of possibility, built on the foundation of love and courage and two people who had been willing to take a chance on each other. And that, Violet thought as Harrison squeezed her hand and smiled at her with those steady, loving eyes, was the greatest gift of all.